In the early 50s, the Navy was looking for a vertical takeoff and landing, or VTOL, fighter aircraft that could operate off of almost any Navy ship. That way, if the dreaded Soviet nuclear attack ever came, the Navy's fighter aircraft would be spread out instead of being sitting ducks.
So the result of this was a competition between two aircraft for a vertical takeoff and landing fighter plane.
The Navy awarded contracts to two competing manufacturers, Convair and Lockheed, to develop prototypes. Convair came up with the XFY-1, also known as the Pogo. Lockheed designed the XFV-1, nicknamed the Salmon. Both these planes were designed to sit on their tails, so they would be ready for vertical takeoff. It would have been great if that had been their only major quirk. For example, the Salmon needed a specially built cradle to raise it into launch position. Talk about swimming upstream. It took 3 years to develop a prototype for the Pogo. The first flight tests were conducted inside an old blimp hangar with a tether attached to the nose for safety. Then it was time to move the Pogo outdoors, minus the lifeline for the pilot. A Marine aviator named Skeets Coleman was the first and one of the last to actually fly one. The pilot had to climb a ladder to reach the Pogo's cockpit, more than 20 feet off the ground. His reclining seat back would be in almost horizontal position, like an astronaut's.
The most frightening thing about flying the Pogo was the terrible position in which the pilot was located.
Johnny Nabel was one of the only other pilots besides Skeets Coleman to attempt to fly the Pogo.
When it came my turn to fly, I was foolish enough to think that I could jump in it and fly it, and I almost wrecked the aircraft doing it.
A new aircraft, a radical new concept, so who needs training?
The Pogo idea proved that the test pilots of the 1950s were fearless.
The XFV-1 was piloted by Herman Fish Salmon. The plane was actually nicknamed after him. But someone must have figured Fish wasn't a cool name for a plane, so they nicknamed it the Salmon instead. Okay. Both aircraft were powered by two counter-rotating propellers on the nose. The Allison YT-40 turboprop engine would provide enough sheer power to give the aircraft lift without the benefit of wings. Once airborne, the aircraft would slowly nose down until it flew horizontally like a conventional airplane. Then, the pilot would simply transition back to vertical mode for landing. Sound easy?
It was probably not too bad to take off. You know, I could take it off. You could take it off. Getting it back on the ground is another story.
The problem was the pilot had to land the plane on its tail backwards while looking over his shoulder. Only sissies would use rear-view mirrors.
So you had to keep your head inside the cockpit, try to twist your head around in this manner, and if you'd like to get a feel for what it was like, try parking an automobile in parallel parking sometime by going this way instead of leaning over and looking at the curb.
But while the Pogo was at least enjoying limited success, the Salmon was floundering. In 2 years of testing, it was never able to take off or land vertically. And if the Pogo and Salmon were having so much trouble with vertical landings on good old stable terra firma, how were they ever supposed to land at sea?
Imagine now doing this, approaching a ship's deck that's pitching in violent seas and trying not to flip the thing over as you contact the surface. Virtually impossible.
During the final stages of the Salmon program, a Lockheed engineer actually admitted that test pilots were afraid to fly it. Test pilots afraid? No one was actually killed flying these aircraft, but by the mid-1950s, the Navy decided the Pogo and Salmon had the wrong stuff, and both programs were scrubbed. The Salmon fishtailing its way to total failure at number 9, and the Pogo coming in at number 8 because it actually did take off and land vertically.